Do you want to learn 30 ways to get anyone to do what you want? Then listen up. Welcome back, everyone. If you're looking to book more discovery calls or clients, then you're in the right place. Now, today, we are going to learn about 30 consumer biases and buying triggers that lead people to take action or to buy or to do anything else that you want them to. Now, while everyone on earth says that marketing tricks don't work on them, they actually work on pretty much everyone, including you and I. Now, a lot of these biases and triggers are similar, but a little bit different. So the ones that overlap, I have tried to group them together. The important point is that the more of these factors that you can stack on top of each other, the more likely you are to get people to do what you want them to. So let's go ahead and jump right in to the 30 consumer biases and buying triggers that you can use today. And by the way, we are going to fly through these pretty quick since we have 30 to go through. So let's go ahead and start out with maybe the most important buying trigger on earth, which is urgency. In other words, limited time. So the point is that one of the best tricks on earth, actually, I hesitate to say tricks because this can actually help us to get out of our own way. But the point is that one of the biggest action triggers that can be used towards someone is urgency. In other words, limited time. So this could say, this sale is only available for the next 12 hours, for only this weekend, only for the next hour, only for the next 30 minutes. Whatever it might be, you are doing people a favor by giving them some type of urgency, which means they have to act now. The next buying trigger is similar, but a little different, which is scarcity. So we just mentioned urgency, which is limited time. Now, scarcity means limited amount. So for example, only available to the first 20 callers, only available to the first 100 customers. I only take 5 clients at a time. All of these things are telling you the exact same idea. There's only a limited amount of this goodie available, so you better hurry up. The next consumer bias that you can use to generate leads, customers, or clients is affinity. In other words, we generally like people who are interested in the same things that we are interested in. Now, this can be something specific, like a sports team that we like, or a travel destination that we prefer, or even a favorite food or something like that. But it can literally extend to anything else. As long as we feel that, you like that thing? I like that thing too. We just can't help but to feel closer and to feel a stronger connection with that person. The next consumer bias is familiarity. In other words, the more familiar we are with something, the more likely we are to buy it or prefer it over something that we don't. The best example of this is that if you have been traveling to some country or city that is extremely different than yours, then you probably ended up eating or buying McDonald's or Burger King or something like that. Now, I know the hippies are going to cry about that, but we've all done it. The point is that when you are in an ambiguous situation, or you're just not sure, or you need to buy something and you just don't know what, you generally go with what you are more familiar with, which can actually go in a lot of different ways. Maybe you saw their ads. Maybe you just know their brand. Maybe your friend mentioned it to you. The point is that if you are more familiar with something, whether it be a product or a brand or a location or whatever it might be, you are much more likely to spend money to get it or to visit it. The next consumer bias and buying trigger is exclusivity. Now, I know that inclusivity and diversity are all the rage these days, but whether you like to admit it or not, most people, they don't only prefer, they are willing to pay a premium for some type of exclusivity. The point is that whether we like to admit it or not, the human brain naturally likes when we are part of an exclusive community that has exclusive benefits. In other words, that other people don't. The next consumer bias is reciprocity. In other words, when anybody helps us in any way, we can't help but to want to help them back. In other words, trust me that I know that most people, when they are met with a free sample, free trial, free gift, or anything like that, most people say, oh, I'm so smart, I'm gonna go get the free sample or the free whatever, and then I'm not gonna buy it. Ha ha ha. But what those people don't know is that your human brain, whether you like it or not, naturally feels the need to help them back or to buy it in anybody that helps you or gives you anything. The next consumer bias is reverse likability. In other words, we like people who like us. Now, just like all of these other biases, this can take many forms, but maybe the easiest way is by defining your niche. So if you tell people, I only help health coaches, or I only help marathon runners, or I only help new moms, or whoever it might be. If you call out the specific type of audience that you are looking for, then you are telling them that I like you and the type of person that you are, which in return makes them, in most cases, not be able to help but to like you back. The next consumer bias is often known as the IKEA effect or even the endowment effect. In other words, this means that when we take part in creating something, or when we feel like it's a part of us, or like we already own it, or it belongs to us, we naturally feel a stronger attachment to it, and we kind of attribute a higher value to it than it's actually worth. So sticking with the IKEA effect part of this, experiments have been done where they noticed that people who actually try and build some type of furniture, and then there's another piece of furniture that was assembled professionally, most people assign a higher value to the one that they helped build. In other words, things that we helped build ourselves, we generally attribute a higher value to. Now, this is most obvious to when people think that their kids are smarter than they think they are, or their dog, or their job, or whatever it might be. But the point is that when we help build something, or create something, or birth something, or whatever it might be, we just can't help but think that it's more valuable than it is. And by the way, the endowment effect part of that is also pretty important, which means that when we feel something belongs to us, we also feel a stronger connection to it. Now, this usually takes place of a demo or demonstration or test drive or take the puppy home for the weekend or something like that. But the point is that if you can help people to feel that something is already theirs, then they are much more likely to default to keeping it. The next consumer bias is that of optimism and hope. Now, to be fair, this generally applies more to the wealthier communities or audiences, but it can actually appeal to pretty much everyone, whether that be in a brand or a politician or whatever. So the point is that if you can appeal to people's nature and just overall desire of hope and optimism and positivity. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't believe those things regularly, but if you can actually capture those things in your marketing and sales message, then that will help you a ton to generate more traffic, leads, clients, and customers. So, have I missed any biases yet? Let us know in the comments below. Our next consumer bias is that of social proof. In other words, businesses, brands, commercials, corporations, they all know that if they can get you to believe everyone else is doing it, then you are a billion times more likely to buy it, or at least to want to buy it. So if that YouTube video has 1 billion views, or that Amazon product has 10,000 reviews, or if LeBron is drinking Sprite, or whatever it might be, the point is that businesses know that if they can get you to believe that everyone else is doing it, then you are pretty much, I don't want to say guaranteed, but much more likely to buy it. The next consumer bias is mental accounting. In other words, people tend to assign different amounts of budget to different ideas, which I know is kind of unclear, but let's put it this way. If I told you, hey, gas on this side of town is $9 a gallon, you might say, whoa, I'm never gonna go there, that's crazy. Okay, but the real difference between going to that gas station and another gas station, after 10 gallons, let's just say is like 30 bucks. Okay, that's fair. But if I tell you, hey, the refrigerator on this side of town is $100 cheaper than on this side of town, people usually will say, nah. They will care less about the absolute amount, even though it's the same amount somewhere else. Or if a burger is $20 at Disneyland, people will say, that's a fair price, even though if at McDonald's, they would say that's crazy. The next consumer bias is of integrity. In other words, we tend to want to reward people that we feel have integrity and contribute to justice and are just overall good people that we want to support. Now, this is usually fine, but I find that the problem comes in here is when this is combined with the similar idea of the just world hypothesis. In other words, that people get what they deserve. So rich people deserve to be rich, poor people deserve to be poor. That may not be the best example, but you get the idea here, which is that people get what they deserve, which isn't exactly always the case. The next consumer bias is of conviction. Now, I first heard about this from Grant Cardone, I believe, but the point is that when you are, I don't want to say in an argument, but when you are contrasting your idea versus somebody else's, generally the person who has more conviction, in other words, the person who believes more in their side, tends to win the argument or even the sale. The next consumer bias is of specificity. Now, I've made entire videos before about the value of trust, like you can find here, but the point is that if you can provide specifics, whether those be numbers or metrics or results or outcomes or whatever they might be, then that naturally builds trust, which leads people to listen to you and eventually buy. Our next consumer bias is simplicity. Now, you may have heard me say before that if you confuse, you lose, which might sound a little oversimplistic, but that really is a fact or a reality in marketing and sales. So the point is that if you want people to listen to you, to pay attention to your message, to click on your button, to potentially become a lead or sale or client, then it would benefit you significantly to keep everything as simple and streamlined as possible. The next consumer bias is the action bias. In other words, when people are thinking about something that is generally negative and all-consuming as it feels like, they are more likely to want to take any action as opposed to doing nothing. Now, of course, assuming that your product or offer will actually help them to reach that outcome, the point is that if you can make people feel that their current situation is extremely negative, and if you offer them a singular solution, then many people, if not most people, are naturally inclined to choose that solution as opposed to none. Our next consumer bias is curiosity. Now, this is actually a big copywriting rule as well, which is that if you can engage people's curiosity, they are pretty much a million times more likely to read the rest of your article or your promotion or your ad, or even to become a lead or a customer. Now, of course, there's a huge difference between being vague in your offer and content, but however you can, try to incorporate curiosity and just make them wonder what it is that you're talking about in your offer or headline. Our next consumer bias is guilt. Now, to be fair, I generally don't like to go this direction, but it is something that you should at least know about. Now, whether it's one of those commercials with the dogs in the shelter that are super sad, or some other type of negative situation that isn't pleasant to look at, the point is that if you can inspire people to feel guilty, which I don't tend to prefer to go this direction, but this can actually work in a lot of different directions, whether it be health or business or whatever. But the point is that if you can make people feel that they should be doing something, but they aren't doing it, that can inspire action as well. Our next consumer bias is greed. Now, you probably don't need me to tell you that people are generally self-interested. Despite everything else, between all the craziness in the world and in their family and in politics and whatever, people are ultimately most concerned with what's going on with them and their lives. And that has to do with the present. But when it comes to the future and projections, of course, following that same idea, people are most interested in their well-being and in their outcome, which is why relying on people's personal self-interest and greed is usually not a bad direction to lean on. Our next consumer bias is the egocentric bias. In other words, how we all tend to remember our memories better for us than they actually were. So the point is that if you tell people, remember how great you were in high school, in middle school, at your previous job, in your previous relationship, in any situation before today, everyone will remember themselves in those situations as more positive than they actually were. The next consumer biases are the self-serving bias and the fundamental attribution bias. In other words, I know these are kind of similar. This means that when we do something good, we tend to take credit for it. But when we do something bad, we tend to blame it on anything else which isn't us. Now, this is kind of natural, I guess you can say, but this doubles on to where we do the opposite with other people. So if somebody else does something negative, we tend to think it is a character trait, but when somebody else does something good, we tend to say it was something external to them or luck. The next consumer bias is the false causality bias. In other words, it is the tendency for people to assume causality, or because X then Y then actually took place. So in other words, if you tell people, did you know that in 2003 I did 10 jumping jacks and then in 2004 a million squid died? Now, that's kind of an extreme example, but the point is that if you only give people a limited amount of chronological information, then they will automatically assume that it was a causal relationship. In other words, that one caused the other, even when they are totally unrelated. And actually, there are some great experiments behind this, which is that when they show people random cloud formations, or even TV static, or just some type of situation where there is no pattern, the point is that humans will force a pattern where none exists. Our next consumer bias is the zero risk bias. In other words, it is the natural human tendency to want zero risk.
I promise I will never die.
Which, needless to say, is almost impossible in any situation. But the point is that if you can appeal to people's desire to want zero risk, and actually this kind of doubles into loss aversion, which means that we really hate losing things, even more than we like winning things. But the point is that if you can make people feel better with a guarantee, or however you can, that they won't lose anything, or that they won't end up any worse afterward than they started with, then they are much more likely to take the action that you want them to. That actually takes me to our next consumer bias, which is loss aversion. In other words, it's the fact that we hate to lose things much more than we like to win things. So if somebody says, hey, I have this deal for you, you might lose $5 or you might gain $5. Most people would say, ooh, I might lose $5. Then I don't care, I'm not gonna get involved. The short story here is that if you can make people feel that they are close to losing something, they are much more likely to react to want to protect it. Our next consumer bias is linking or association. In other words, there are already ideas that exist within your audience's brain and mind. Your goal is to attach your message to one of those ideas that already exists, as opposed to creating a brand new one. Our next consumer bias is known as the Peltzman effect, or often as the licensing effect. In other words, when somebody takes an action that is meant to do something, they often feel more licensed or more right to do the opposite. In other words, I went to the gym today, therefore I have the right to eat a whole pizza, or anything like that. Or another example is how when seatbelts became law, people felt, well, I'm taking all this work to be safe, now I can drive less safe to counteract this new safety that I added on. Now, clearly, there's a few different ways that you can add this into your offer or situation, but the point is that you definitely can tell people that you work so hard, you deserve to XYZ, which acts as a counterbalance. Our next consumer biases are similar, which are the bandwagon effect or the conformity bias. Now, I know that we've already talked about the social proof bias, but the point here is that we naturally feel the need to do the same thing as everybody else. So if we feel that our favorite color is blue, but if we notice that everybody in our city, if their favorite color is red, regardless of how brave or cool or whatever you are, you will naturally feel inclined to go in the same direction. The next consumer bias and buying trigger is the compromise effect. In other words, no matter where you start, if you are arguing for something, and if somebody admits or is willing to give up something that they want, you are much more likely to give in and agree to the terms. So the point is that if somebody else gives up something important to them, you are much more likely to give up something that's important to you to agree and to reach a deal. Our next consumer bias is a common one, which is the authority bias. In other words, no matter how smart or great we think we are, when somebody shows up in a doctor's uniform, a lab coat, or a police officer, or a firefighter, or whoever it might be, when somebody is clearly an expert or an authority, however that may be, this means that we tend to defer all opinion and decision making to them. And probably the most important consumer bias and buying trigger of all is to hit the like button and subscribe below. If you learned something interesting today, it does help a lot. For more help finding your niche, creating your signature program, or getting clients, then book a free call with me below to find the biggest opportunities in your business. Well, that wraps us up for today. Thanks everyone for stopping by, and I'll see you on the next one.